Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 11 of our special programming here at Humanity Rising on the Conference of Parties that is winding down in Glasgow. Over the last 11 days, we've been covering COP26. There was very high expectations, but inevitably, as has happened on every other COP occasion, the governments of the world engaged in rhetoric, but very little action. Although it was very interesting, day before yesterday, with very little media attention actually, but we'll be talking about it more fully tomorrow in our final session. The US military, the Department of Defense of the United States, issued a finding that said in no uncertain terms and without any linguistic or diplomatic ambiguity that climate change is real, it's getting worse, and that the US government need to take in, and governments around the world, that essentially, as the UN Secretary General has indicated, we are in code red. Yesterday, John Kerry, who is President Biden's special ambassador for climate change, announced there in Glasgow an agreement between China, whose leader Xi Jinping did not come to the COP, but nevertheless, China and the United States agreed to cooperate on climate change matters. Even though, as we all know, China has made it clear repeatedly that it is not going to do anything to stop its emissions till at least 2030. So China is now the largest carbon polluter in the world and is fiercely asserting that it will continue to do so until it's in its self-interest not to, probably 10 years from now. But nevertheless, John Kerry extracted an agreement for the United States and China, two of the largest polluters, along with India, to cooperate. So this comes into the category of what Greta Thunberg said is the blah, blah, blah on the part of our governments, which is leaving the world and the climate movement at a very critical juncture. Knowing that we are now in a situation where escalating climate and ecological turbulence is no longer avoidable. And that is something, as we begin to conclude COP26, we all have to internalize that once again, in the face of the most obvious fact in the world, that our climate, our ecology, is now spinning out of control. Our governments have chosen, with virtual unanimity, against the pleas of the countries like the island states that are suffering the most acutely. The world governments have chosen platitudes more than action. Climate action tracking, one of the NGOs there at the COP released its finding over the last 48 hours, indicating that at the end of COP26, 2.4 degrees rise in centigrade in global temperatures is where the world is now headed. So it's within that context that we want to turn our attention today on a final theme before our wrap up tomorrow on bioregional regeneration, because nothing less than the regeneration of entire bioregions around the world will suffice to deliver the human race at this very critical moment. But before we jump into that program, let us pause. With all this chaos around us, the ineptitude and corruption of our governments, the passion of our climate movement, the indigenous voices that we've heard from the COP and here at Humanity Rising, let's just take a minute or two to quiet ourselves and center ourselves in our bodies. And for the next minute and a half, attune ourselves with our hearts. See if you can just close your eyes and listen to your heartbeat in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving that you're alive. We're all alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart and heart full of gratitude and love for each and every one of you who are joining our session today. And I want to, in particular, thank our Spanish speaking interpreters. We're live streaming and broadcasting throughout the Spanish speaking world, but also over scores of live streaming partners globally. I want to introduce my good friend and colleague, Ed Muller, who's been a founding partner for Humanity Rising over the last 18 months as we've been broadcasting day by day, who has really been the champion of regeneration as the critical challenge in the face of the possible extinction of the human race. Regeneration is really the only option we've got left. And Ed has really brought that truth into our contemplations of what we as a species need to do at this critical moment. He's the founder of the University of International Cooperation in Costa Rica. He's the founder of Regenerate Costa Rica and the Global Regeneration Corps that we've been establishing together with hundreds of partners from around the world, and has been active at a global level in the leadership of bioregional regeneration. So Ed, thank you so much for everything that you've done on this theme, and I now turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Today we have a great program. With all the bad news coming out of the COP, and we really didn't expect any good news before the COP. And the fact that just a month ago, we went through the COP of biodiversity, and it didn't even get into the press. And the results from that COP were not very stimulating in terms of our main reason that why we exist is because ecosystems are providing services, and we're losing the ability for them to keep on providing the services for us to be on the planet. But instead of looking at the negative parts, I decided, instead of also bringing scientists to talk about biodiversity itself, I actually chose to have 3 great speakers, and I will also add something about Regenerate Costa Rica, which is a nationwide initiative. We have Chip Connolly, a very well-known hotelier and strategist for Airbnb, and a speaker, a writer, an author, who will tell us about how you go forward by to establish regenerative communities. We have Sean Paul. Thank you, Sean, for coming on. Sean is also a leading global leader in terms of regeneration, working with indigenous communities in Michoacan. We met a couple of years ago, I think, and it's amazing the work that Sean is doing too. And then we have Alex Pryor. He's coming in the second hour. He couldn't make it for the whole full 2 hours. Who established energy drink. Guayaquil has an energy drink where they produce from yerba mate in Southern America and conserve biodiversity and work with indigenous communities while providing a strong business model. So these are examples of how we can bring biodiversity back very quickly. And I think nature, if it has shown us one thing, it's that it's willing to cooperate. The few months we gave a vacation last year, it just popped back up, cleared the air in Beijing, it cleared the air in Delhi. People that grew up in Delhi had never seen the mountains before. The Mediterranean cleared up. Our towns in Costa Rica were flooded with animals that were starting to take back then. And then we decided to get back and build back better, which I hate the term, and just go back to whatever we were doing as usual, and we're going to destroy our capacity to live on this planet very quickly. So I won't delay this anymore. Chip, please go ahead and tell us your story.
Thank you, Ed. And Jim, it's an honor to be here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we are creating the Modern Elder Academy. MEA is creating regenerative communities in 2 places and hoping to be a catalyst for others. First of all, this is, of course, a very important topic. And even the subject of regeneration has the risk of being greenwashing. It's a beautiful term. It has many different meanings to it. In health, it can mean regenerative medicine and restoring your cells. In a community, it could be restoring an area that is difficult, or going through trouble. In a personal life, it could be regenerating your sense of self. But of course, the primary focus we have here on this conversation today is really about the planet. And I've learned a lot about regeneration from Paul Hawken. So Paul is on our guest faculty for our Modern Elder Academy campus in Baja. He actually lives part-time, almost within walking distance of our campus. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, Paul brought out his most recent book called Regeneration in September, and it immediately skyrocketed up to the New York Times bestsellers list for 3 weeks in a row. So regeneration to me speaks to the idea of moving beyond sustainability, moving beyond organics, to the idea of actually how do we make things better than they were before. Now, not build back better. And I agree with you. I don't love that triple B. Sounds like the Better Business Bureau. I don't love that. But I do love the idea of how do we grow a community as opposed to build a community. So one of the reasons that Paul Hawken has been I've been a sort of a fanboy of his for a long time is when I started my boutique hotel company when I was 26 years old called Joie de Vivre. It means joy of life in French. Started it in San Francisco and created 52 boutique hotels over the course of 24 years as the CEO. Is that Paul's book, Growing a Business, was my Bible back in the mid 1980s when I started my business. And one of the things he talked about was not about building a business, but it was about growing a business, thinking of life as being organic and natural and creating a path of growth for a business or for anything that you do in a way that feels natural and not forced. Now, most businesses have a structure around how they think about their business that actually almost uses military analogies and metaphors, or any kind of thing that feels rather driven in its approach. So over the course of my 40-year career, first as a boutique hotelier, then 9 years helping the founders of Airbnb grow their company, and then more recently, the last 4 years as the founder and CEO of the Modern Elder Academy, I've liked the idea of how do you use organic principles around growth to define a company. So MEA has a campus on the beach, an hour north of Cabo San Lucas in Baja California Sur. And it's the world's first midlife wisdom school. One of the things that we tried to do in creating the world's first midlife wisdom school and a place that was dedicated to not lifelong learning, but long life learning, meaning how do you live a life that's as deep and meaningful as it is long, is to look at the principles of regeneration, both in terms of, we had four pillars that really define our premise about regeneration. How do you regenerate the soil? So regenerating the soil, as most of you probably know, is one of the top dozen ways to actually have an impact on the climate crisis. And so regenerating the soil for us means using regenerative ranching and farming techniques, rotational grazing, lack of monocropping, looking at how do we create biodiversity in what we're growing. And then instead of actually having, a fairway, as is true of a retirement community, a regenerative community has a farm at the center of it, and then a series of homes, modest size homes around that farm or that ranch. And so our first version of this is in Baja California Sur, and only about 1.5 miles from our MEA campus on the beach. And we'll be starting construction next month, and it is an example of how do you create a regenerative community that actually helps to save farmland, while also introducing sort of the agrohood idea of people living, in simpatico relationship with the land. Our second principle beyond regenerating the soil is regenerating the soul. It's something we all know we need. It's part of the reason we have almost 2,000 alumni now from 28 countries who have come to our program, MEA, to actually help to repurpose themselves and reframe their relationship with aging. To regenerate the soul means a person feels like they have received a shot of energy to why they are living on this planet, what their sense of purpose and meaning is. The third principle of regenerative communities for us is regenerating community, just the word community, which is a word that's bandied around about quite a bit right now. But we know that over the next 50 years or beyond, we are going to have a caregiving crisis. We already have it. The caregiving crisis is part of the reason a lot of people have quit their jobs. The Great Resignation sometimes has to do with the fact that people have other obligations. And we have done an awful job in the United States of addressing what caregiving needs we're going to need to have in the future. But what if you lived in a community, sort of like living in an intergenerational family, where as you get older, instead of having to worry about assisted living or feeling like you have to go into a place that's like age apartheid, where you're just segregated from people of different generations, but instead it's your neighbors who actually go out and do your shopping for you. Or if they haven't seen you in a day or two, they check in just to see how things are going, knowing that there's a potluck once a week in your little community and everybody brings to the table what they most love cooking or eating. So the idea of a community that is dedicated to caring for each other is sort of the opposite of what we've seen in American residential suburban communities, where it's quite alienated. Everybody has their own little plot of land, and you don't know your neighbors. It's also sort of different than what you see in a retirement community, because there's an element of you don't expect it to be all the hired help earning minimum wage coming to serve you, but instead it's people who care about you and love you, who are your neighbors, who are there to support you. So that's the Regenerate the Community. We also have 25 regional chapters around the world that our alumni of MEA have helped set up. And so that's part of the community as well. The last pillar for us of a regenerative community is to actually regenerate the locale, which means the people and place in which we're located. How are we helping the place and the people around us be better off as a result of us being there? In terms of our regenerative community in Baja, that means a large percentage of the profits that we make in that project go to creating housing for locals, for Mexicans who have lived a long time but have never owned their own home. So we can build homes, create homes, grow homes in that community that are 1/10 the cost of the ones that we actually sell to our alumni community. And that's partly out of a relationship we have with a local contractor who wants local Mexicans to actually have homes that they can buy. So that's part of how we build back. Part of it, how we help create a regenerative locale is in our case, we were in a very rural place. There was no fire truck. we had a volunteer fire department, but we had no fire truck. So how do we raise money to help buy a fire truck for the community? So we're doing this also in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We have a 2,600 acre ranch there, and we're going to be additionally looking at how are we regenerating the locale there as well. So in sum, Ed and I are going to talk for a moment in just a second. What we're trying to do is be a catalyst. Our goal is not to have, dozens of dots on the map of MEA regenerative communities all over the world. Instead, what our goal is to be a catalyst for how can others, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit entrepreneurs, look at the idea of regenerative communities as an alternative to the domination of retirement communities of the last 60 years, which have been basically age segregated, not necessarily giving back to their communities. And frankly, the average age of people going into retirement communities today is about 85 years old. 40 years ago, it was 65. Our regenerative communities and our MEA alums have an average age of 54. So it's a different stage in life. And just like yoga and meditation were very hippy-dippy in the 1960s and 70s, and they went mainstream, we believe that intentional communities, places where people have a common ethos, and in this case, a common ethos around regeneration, are an idea that is about to go mainstream. So Ed, I'm going to send it back to you, and maybe we can you can ask me a couple questions.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, the question I always ask myself is how can we scale things up? If we look around the world over the last 10 years or 15 years, we've seen so many initiatives, many are pilot projects, but they're detached from other initiatives, and we don't get to the mainstream. We cannot get enough volume and movement to go past the chasm of the early adopters. So our biggest worry right now with the projects I'm involved in is how to scale this up. And you're saying you want to be an example, and I think that's beautiful. First thing I'm going to do is put you in contact with the Regenerative Communities Network that we launched in 2018. And it is that we are having a joint network where we have places, bioregions that are doing regeneration. Actually, I met Sean in a face-to-face meeting we had in Mexico within that network, and then be able to co-create solutions. And you're bringing in a whole new dimension, which I hadn't even thought about it. The elders, and I'm still not there, but I'm pretty soon going to be there. So it would be very interesting to see how we can learn, and especially certain things like the place I'm living right now is northern Costa Rica. It's a hotspot for tourism, and tourism never went down. We didn't have a low season, but in spite of that, a lot of people lost their jobs and everything because it's not the regular tourist that comes to a hotel. These are people that are moving down here, and we have founders of very big, well-known companies that are living here now. Came for a couple of months, and then the wife said, "I'm not going back. You buy this house, and we're staying here." So we're seeing an influx of huge amounts of money through billionaires and an alienation of the local communities that can't even pay the increase in the value of land. And the supermarkets here charge 2 or 3 times the value of a normal supermarket in the rest of the country. So how to bring this type of community together with the local community, if you can explain a little bit more about that, because I think that is crucial. It cannot be islands. I think the eco-villages network is a great example. It's a beautiful example. I think there are 11,000 of them, but I haven't seen too many that go beyond looking at their belly button. Yeah, they don't permeate on the surrounding communities. We have some of those communities here for decades, and the neighbors don't even know what's happening inside that community.
Yeah.
So those two aspects, I'd like to listen a little bit more.
Let me try to answer it, and then if I don't answer it in a way that adequately addresses what you've asked, please do a follow-up. I mean, I'm lucky enough in my life to have been witness to and participant in taking an idea that was sort of a niche idea and taking it mainstream. And I was able to do that as one of the first boutique hoteliers in the United States, which really helped to revolutionize the idea of hotels in the United States. And then secondly, with Airbnb and home sharing 9 years ago, when I joined the founders to help them take their great idea that was going global and take it mainstream. So I am very committed and dedicated to taking the idea of regenerative communities with a common ethos around how do we regenerate the planet and ourselves and our community to a mainstream place. Part of the way we've done that to date with Modern Elder Academy is over half of the people who come to our programs are on some form of scholarship. So in our opinion, wisdom is not taught, it's shared. And so it's not just the traditional people who go to normal retreat centers and also pay quite often a lot of money. It's elementary school teachers, it's firemen, it's union pipe fitters, it's physical therapists who are in a workshop. And in many cases, by subsidizing some of the housing, we're able to get them to be able to buy a home as well. So I would say the first point is to make sure that the audience of who we're speaking to is much broader than just the traditional audience that has shown interest in intentional communities or shown interest in regenerative land management principles. And part of the way we do that is not just our regional chapters around the world, but also, just having me or other leaders on our team go out and do interviews, not with the traditional media, but more with the mainstream media. And so that has allowed us to maybe create a platform that allows us to bring in people who would normally not have even known this existed. Secondly, we teach. We have a Catalyst Fellows program, which is people who want to come and learn from the Modern Elder Academy and our regenerative principles because they want to go out and create their own version of it. So we allow them to come to our MEA campus for free, go through a program with us so they can go back out into somewhere else in the world, whether it's Bogota, Colombia, or Prague, Czechoslovakia, and create their own version of this. We have a group in Australia doing this right now, 12 people who have created something called MEAX there, who are actually taking our principles and applying them there, and over time, creating regenerative communities in Australia. So I guess at the end of the day, we have to sort of move out of the mindset that you only sell to people who already know what you're talking about. How do you broaden that? And secondly, move out of the competition mode into the co-opetition mode. So that how are we cooperatively supporting something? Because the more we help the world see the category of regenerative communities being a future thing, the more it's helping us in our efforts, because otherwise nobody has any idea what I'm talking about. If I go to some conference like I am here in Miami, Florida right now, where I spoke at a conference full of real estate developers, and I was talking about regenerative communities. And at first they're like, what the hell are you talking about? But by the end of the speech last night, with 250 of the best known real estate developers in the world, they came up to me and said, oh my gosh, we never thought of this. So that's part of it, is how are we a catalyst out there for others to do what's right?
That's beautiful. We're actually working on best practices, and we hope to go to certification of regenerative developments in urbanization to try to stop the destruction of nature, because people buy properties here on the coast because they're surrounded by monkeys and wildlife and trees and beautiful beaches, but then everything's thrown down and built cement and pools and golf courses. So we're actually working on the integration of biodiversity, increasing biodiversity plus, community plus, and business plus. How do you incorporate the biodiversity aspects, which is today's subject, in your communities?
So in Santa Fe, in the northern New Mexico region, this is a really important piece of it, because the biodiversity, we talk about it very broadly. It's the plants, it's the animals, it's also the cultural diversity that comes from being in a place that has a long history of Native American elders. So part of it is having people on our team who are experts at this. We have a guy named Jan Leffler-Bird, who is basically grew up in a primitive, very rural part of Baja and learned biodiversity based upon his parents teaching him about it. It was his form of homeschooling. So he's a great guide for us, both in what we're doing in Baja as well as in Santa Fe. But it's also then connecting with the local people in the northern New Mexico area to actually understand, like with the organization Regenesis, which is an organization based in Santa Fe, global organization, but happens to be based in the backyard of where we're going to be doing things, having them help us to understand how do you regenerate in a localized kind of way that is focused on biodiversity. The most important thing for us to do in Santa Fe with our first project there with 2,600 acres is to look at how do we bring the soil health back to life? How do we create the microbiome that actually allows for a rich set of little slugs and worms and other kinds of very small animal life to actually create a much more absorptive soil. So when there's rain, which doesn't happen all that often in New Mexico, instead of all the rain coming in a monsoon rain and just going off, it actually goes into the water table. Yes, and I still have a lot to learn here. I'm humble enough to know that I am only in my early process of learning about this, but surrounding myself with people who have been doing this for years and decades is part of the way we're actually able to hopefully make a difference.
I'll give you an idea, and I would like to hear what your impression is. The person who founded the Center for Transformation Action in our university was a mayor of a city for many years, and also Minister of Education later. But what he did was give citizenship to hummingbirds, bees, butterflies, and earthworms.
Yeah.
So they were citizens of the city.
Yeah.
And they were part of the city that had to be included. What do you think that idea would bring to your communities?
Oh, I think it's amazing. And if only they could vote. Yeah, I think, the idea of shifting from the egocentricity of all of us are separate to the sense of oneness that comes from feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself is, to me, the one of the beauties of growing older. Growing older speaks to the idea of moving from the operating system being the ego to the operating system being the soul. Carl Jung talked about this. The psychologist Richard Rohr, the Christian mystic, talks about this. He's become a good friend of ours and a big fan of what MEA is doing in New Mexico because he's based there. So long story short is helping us to see the oneness is, to me, one of the opportunities of growing older. because it means we're moving out of the egocentricity, which is part of our, as a younger person, it's part of how we understand how we show up in the world. And let's also be clear, there are so many people who are older who are still extremely egocentric. So I am generalizing, but I am talking about sort of life, adult development, psychology here a little bit. So yes, I think, moving into that state of oneness is the only way we solve our ability to have the relationship with this planet and all of the sentient beings on the planet that will allow us to flourish and regenerate in the long term.
We'll definitely be in touch with the Global Regeneration Corps. We launched a tool based on 7 Vortex that is a hive. And what it does is connect you to networks and allows people who are working similar things to find each other around the planet. And I think these instruments are really necessary for that upscaling and going to the majority of, do we have a tipping point where things start changing on their own without us having to push it. And I'd like to see, or maybe you can just mention a few things about how you're actually engaging with other initiatives other than yours. You already mentioned that you bring people in that want to start other initiatives outside, but do you have a follow-up system, or do you have some sort of structure already that gives them the support to do this?
Yeah, first of all, one of the social impact metrics that we're using to determine if we're effective as an organization is the catalytic nature of how are we creating an incubator for social entrepreneurs to go out and do things. So we actually not only sort of bring people in, but we help then mentor them as they go back out into the community and create their ventures that are, making a difference in their community. So that's one thing we do. I mean, on a broader level, we work quite actively with academic institutions. I'm on the advisory board of the Stanford Center on Longevity. And how do we help institutions that are educating younger people to create more intergenerational collaboration around the topic of, climate? I'm on the board of the encore.org, where we also do that as well, because they're moving more in the direction of a co-generation movement that's intergenerationally focused on major societal problems like climate. So I think the key at the end of the day is I gave a TED talk about 12 years ago called Measuring What Matters. And I went to the Bhutan to study their gross national happiness index. And I did that partly because as a CEO of a large boutique hotel company, I thought that we were too fixated in companies on what's easy to measure. And I wanted to understand, how do we measure the things that are harder for us, that are more valuable? And so I think one of the ways we need to help capitalism wake up to these issues is to get better at measuring the intangibles. And I think when you do that, and then you hold companies accountable to metrics, you start to see corporations take a more active role in solutions. And to me, that's the way we solve this, not because I am saying governments don't have the capacity, but as COP has shown again and again, and is like, it's really going to be pioneers outside of institutions that are probably going to make the difference. And many of them will be companies.
Yeah, we need to get a global network for co-creation of solutions around the world. I know you have to go, but there's one specific question. What's the name of the Santa Fe Regeneration Project?
Well, so the Modern Elder Academy is the overall umbrella, and then our regenerative communities are called the Modern Elder Academy Regenerative Communities. If you go to modernelderacademy.com and click on the homepage Regenerative Communities, you can learn more. And the project we have in Baja is called Baja Sage. But you won't find a website for Baja Sage, because the moment we announced it to our alumni community, it's sold out in about 2 weeks with very affordable, smaller homes. And so there's not even a website for it, because it's been really our alumni community that have embraced it. But over time, I promise you, we will open it up for beyond our alumni to be part of these regenerative community movement.
to get you here in Costa Rica, and let's do a regenerative community here.
I love it there, and Stephen, has been a good friend of mine with his community down there, and I look forward to visiting you.
Good, thank you so much. You can stay on the program, but I know you have to leave, so
I'll stay for a few minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to bring Sean on to speak with you guys. I don't want to take time away from Sean. Just go ahead yourself. I think your project is so clear and impactful. People will just enjoy it. So please, Sean, go ahead.
Thank you, Edward. This is just really loved. You just put an incredible group of people together. Some of the people I've just admired their trajectory, Chip and Alex Guayaki. So this is just an impressive group you brought together. I'm here joining, a little dark I'm seeing, joining you from Morelia, Michoacan, Mexico. That's where Ejido Verde is based, the organization, company I'm running. And I thought I'd just, and one of the things I really, tying into Chip's, I really resonated with Chip's comments around this, how we deal with aging. And we deal with how do we live life, what's regeneration, but this is something I'm at 57, taking care of 3 80-year-old parents and just really living the broken system we have of how the generations relate to one another. And an interesting flip side of that, in Morelia, Michoacan, it's a colonial, very affordable city in Mexico. We're having record amounts of Americans and Canadians coming to Morelia, shopping for retirement communities, right? Because their dollar can go further here. So I know Chip, once again, as a visionary, is on to something big, but I'm certainly living it in Morelia, Michoacan, where we just have never seen hundreds of people are coming to explore retirement options in Mexico and places like Michoacan. To get my participation going, I'm going to start with a video. This is a 3-minute video that gives, I think, a very succinct story of what we're doing at Ejido Verde, and I'll follow that by, a little more contextualized presentation. So let me make sure. This technology. Let's see if I can make this work. I think it should. There we go. All right. So this again, 2 minute. This is a great 2-minute summary.
The noble and proud Purépecha indigenous nation in southern Mexico struggles with poverty, exclusion, and loss of identity. Thousands of their young are forced to emigrate to earn a living. But there is a solution rooted in their deepest traditions. A pine plantation the size of Boston, or 24,000 football fields, is slowly being established on their lands. This plantation will not be felled, yet will provide much needed income year after year to the Purépecha families that have inhabited these areas for thousands of years. Launched in 2009, our project, Ejido Verde Reserves, has already established 2,400 hectares of native pines that produce pine resin, a commodity used in 50 different applications worldwide, such as adhesives, chewing gum, and even soft drinks. Pine resin is a millennial tradition that is even mentioned in the Bible. It is man's oldest medicine, natural preservative of wine for 7,000 years, and also happens to be a surprisingly powerful weapon against poverty. After year 10, the trees can be tapped, and the tapper will make around $18,000 per year, surpassing the $7,000 they would normally make. If Ejido Verde manages to reach its goal, the income to forest dwellers over the next 30 years could even reach $1 billion. See why the United Nations said that a resin tapper is the best forest steward? There's more. Turns out, pine trees also protect aquifers, so the returning water will enable these lands to be more productive for crops and cattle. According to Australian experts, in the next 30 years, Ejido Verde could potentially absorb over 6 million tons of carbon from the atmosphere. But most importantly, the income will allow the Purépecha to stay on their land and preserve their unique cultures, traditions, and languages. Recently, Ejido Verde partnered with Kiva.org, the pioneer of crowdfunding for social enterprises. Kiva will help speed up the tempo of planting by inviting its lenders to support this win-win-win effort.
Okay, so interesting. This video was put together some years ago, and Kiva was the first outside money that was invested in the Hito Verde's reforestation work. The project got started by a Mexican family business that for 100 years has been buying pine resin from forest communities in Michoacan, turning that pine resin into specialty ingredients sold to corporations in the world, around the world. That video that you saw was part of a campaign with Kiva. Again, our first outside money. We got 10,000 capital providers from 78 countries with no marketing or promotion by Hito Verde. So it's really, how do we make big, bold ideas happen? This is just one of the tools we have. Thank goodness crowdfunding is, I think, becoming more robust, more accessible as a way to make big ideas happen. So while it wasn't, it's very significant to me. 10,000 capital providers. You're helping us plant trees on land that are communally owned by the indigenous communities that live there. I'm going to now turn. I have my team put together a presentation. So if you're hearing me okay and seeing me okay, just give some visuals to share with my share along with my comments. We're working in a region in Michoacan you might know is known for the monarch butterfly. Monarch butterfly, I'm sure if not most, if not all of you know, travels for 7 generations from Michoacan and goes, throughout parts of the United States and Canada and returns to the exact same place in Michoacan that today is under the protection of the Monarch Biosphere Reserve. It's an area maybe 200 hectares of. Imagine this is one of the natural wonders of the world. How do these butterflies know to come back to the exact same place? We're restoring degraded, deforested areas with native pines in the areas of influence around these biosphere reserves. And that's one of our connections to biodiversity. At Hito Verde, we're a pine resin company positioned to become a lead supplier in this $10 billion global pine chemical industry. Very few know that the volume of cacao traded in the world is equivalent to the volume of pine resin. Everybody, everywhere, every day uses a product that has a little bit of pine resin in it, beginning with your shoes or your pens. So our approach is a unique reforestation model to restore degraded lands, establishing commercial agroforestry plantations for the purpose of harvesting pine resin. Pine resin you get by scratching the bark, like maple syrup. You scratch the bark without hurting the tree, and you can extract the resin. We've been getting some lovely international recognition. Fast Companies tell us that we're one of the world's most innovative companies. World Resources Institute with a 20 by 20 Latin American initiative recognized us as the best landscape restoration project in Latin America. And we got B Corp Best for the World award earlier this year for our outsized environmental performance, and there's more. What we're doing is we're working on regenerating transformational wealth for forest communities, industry, and investors. We're doing that with a unique reforestation model, and we're on track to increase Mexico's pine resin supply by 300% over a 30-year period, establishing 12,000 hectares, as we heard in the video, with the size of the city of Boston, where I sometimes measure it as the size of 2 Manhattans. To date, we've established 4,280 hectares, putting parcels on 625 family farms. That last year was about almost 1,200 jobs for people to plant and take care of new forests in their communities. And we're tracking the carbon, we're sequestering on an annual basis. And this is what the progress we've made. And I'd say we're on track really over the next few years to plant, up to 12,000 hectares in Michoacan. And
sorry, Sean, just a moment. You're sharing screen. You're doing a presentation, but you're not sharing it.
Oh my! Thank you for that.
You need to put a share screen and then put the presentation on.
Whoopsie! I thought it was. Thank you.
There you are.
Okay. This is what I want you to. This is a little bit what I was just referring to. Sorry about that.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests.
Sorry. Too much technology. Okay, so that's it. We've planted 4,280 hectares with 625 families, and that puts us on our path to establish 12,000 hectares over the next few years, where we expect 2,000 families to have new, some of them, people call them pine resin orchards. Globally, there are 800,000 tappers of pine resin. The image you see on the right is what traditional tapping looks like in Mexico. Mexico is the top 5 global producer. Some of the more common uses for pine resin include adhesives, biofuels, preservatives, and food and beverage, and other industries. We're watching as the world is losing its forests. It's losing its supply of pine resin. Ejido Verde grows out of the fact that the availability of pine resin in Michoacan has contracted threefold in 60 years. So we have 3 times less pine resin than we did 60 years ago because of rampant systemic deforestation. And they've been looking for a lot of ways to counter that trend, but where we've landed with industry and forest communities, the answer is establishing plantations with native trees. The image you see here is that tree we estimate is close to 100 years old. So the trees we plant today can create resin and revenue for 100 years, which I calculate as 3 generations. The demand for our products made with pine resin is steady and growing. And frankly, we can't keep up with the demand. And that's the biggest problem for our industry, is having to say no to customers. As we move to a low carbon economy and we substitute hydrocarbons with green alternatives, that offers a huge future for pine chemicals that can substitute hydrocarbons used in pinks and paints, inks, adhesives, and other industries. So, the beneficiaries of our work, to get a sense and tie into the topic here of our title, we're working primarily rural and indigenous people. So the people that are planting trees on their land, 50% of them, are living in poverty as defined in Mexico. We're working in an area where there's been chronic out-migration. People are often seeking economic opportunities elsewhere, in cities in Mexico, or a lot of migration to the United States. I'd say about 65% of the power picture people working with, 65% of them are considered poor, 35% considered extremely poor. So it's considered, I think, largely a poor and vulnerable population by Mexico's standards, or even international standards as well. So at the core of what we're doing, we're planting trees, and we're integrated into a supply chain. We're increasing production of resin by 10x. Resin harvested in the natural forest versus in the planted forest, we're increasing productivity, 10 times. Collection, as I mentioned, of resin is harmless to the tree and creates employment and income for local people, affirming their local culture. Yeah. So in terms of one of the things we often get asked about, and certainly the topic here is something I think about, how we're affecting climate and how we're affecting biodiversity. We certainly know native pine trees, unlike some parts of the world where pine trees are exotic, pine trees are native here, and they have a positive effect on the watershed. We're having a very positive effect on the biological activity of soils. We're actually growing the soils in the work that we're doing. I'd say the issue, we do often put on parcels single species. We're introducing agricultural companion crops, but at their core, these are small parcels of monocultures. And 4 hectares is the average size of our parcel. So we have a barren degraded landscape, and we put in these average size 4-hectare parcels. And I guess to my point, while it is monoculture and single or 2 species that we're planting on a plot, what we are seeing is the effect of, it has an effect of creating parcels that connect natural forest fragments. And we're seeing an effect of, unintentional, of creating biological corridors across landscapes. And we're getting testimonies from local people talking about how wildlife is returning to the landscape, birds and mammals in particular. So I'd say this is something I certainly, in my life trajectory, 30 years, thinking about how do we do a better job conserving biodiversity, I do find myself in a growth opportunity of how do I advance conventional forestry that tends to lean on monoculture, which is antithetical to my vision of how we grow biodiversity in the world. But I do see the work that I'm doing as improving the genetic diversity of rare and species that are going extinct of native pine trees. And we're watching, rare and endangered species come back to the landscapes. So it gives a flavor of biodiversity effect, and happy to get into that a little bit more. In a nutshell, we've crafted a model. We're combining financing and technology to provide landowners. Landowners are communities, land's communally owned, and they assign usufruct rights to individual family farms. Here you get a sense of what some of that work looks like on the ground. In our very short rainy season, we have about 3 months of rain. And so we planted pretty much all of our trees in the month of July this year. So we're planting 30,000 trees a day in the month of July. And all the work is being done by local people in their own communities, which they're being paid for. And they repay that investment with the resin produced. So that's part of our model. So we support and invest in planting, taking care of these trees for 10 years. And after 10 years, they're big enough to tap for pine resin and generate revenue. And when they do produce that resin after year 10, that's how communities repay the investment we've made in establishing these new forests. So it's a 20-year cycle. You could say we're looking at a 20-year investment commitment Ejido Verde is making to those communities. And alongside the financing of those plantations, we can guarantee the purchase at a fair market price of all the resin that they produce. And again, back to a part of our model, one pillar of our we call it a regenerative business model. I'd say one of the core pillars of that business model is the design of commercial agroforestry plantations. We've used a lot of best practices from around the world to adapt it to Michoacan, where we're establishing 800 native pine trees that are high yielding in resin, often multiple species. I think I mentioned some of these, biodiversity benefits. Now, this gets back to our second pillar of our business model. It's what we call solidarity loans or community lending, where our investment is $4,800 US per hectare. That's invested over a 10-year period. It's coupled with technology that we're providing and training. And again, the investment's repaid in the production of resin, where we basically set a price of where we don't want money, we want resin. So 6,000 kilograms of resin per hectare is what we're looking for that can get paid to us in from year 11 to year 20 in the investment agreement. And the use of all that money, the $4,800 per hectare, the vast majority of it is going to pay local people to establish and take care of these new forests. So this is it in a nutshell, what we're doing at Ejido Verde. I'd say, it's an unusual business in that the project's been around for 11 years. We legally incorporated in 2018. And in many ways, we're pretty sophisticated, yet an early stage company in terms of where we have a few years to get to break even. We're raising $50 million. We've raised half of that money already. And now I'm kind of over the hump. 50% of the money raised. We're raising money from impact investors from around the world to help us realize our goal. Actually, I think this project isn't just about 12,000 hectares that we're focused on, but I have people asking me how we're going to expand across Mexico into other parts of the world. The market opportunity in pine resin, it's a blue ocean. I invite wherever you are, if you're in an emerging market, those taking advantage of this pine resin revolution opportunity include countries like Vietnam, South Africa, Paraguay, are all getting into this business and growing as relative small producers like Mexico. So anyone interested in copying our model, adapting our model, collaborating with us, learning together, certainly part of the principles I think about of how do we build a regenerative practice and a regenerative business. It's really redefining how we are in relationship with one another. And I guess in closing, one of the big things I think about and leaning into regenerative business and thinking about Ejido Verde and in my place of Michoacan is how do we build business and relationships predicated on reciprocity. So here in Mexico, you may know, is a big state. There's a big brother, low-income people have a handout mentality. And I'm saying, how do we be partners, not be us, them, rich, poor? And what does it mean to be in relationships of reciprocity with our community, with the earth, with one another, with our community? So these are, people often look at me like I'm from out of space when I raise these questions, but I do think this is one of the a jugular principle for Ejido Verde of how do we lean into a regenerative journey and building a win-win-win, as we call it. We need profits for investors and industry. We want transformational wealth for communities. But it's been a really exciting journey. Thank you for this opportunity to share a bit of what we're up to. And hopefully it will stimulate some thinking, and welcome hearing from any of you.
Thank you, Sean. That was, every time I listen to you, it just amazes me even more that we're getting to points where biodiversity conservation is actually a positive outcome of business. When I see in many countries, including mine, that companies, government, projects are still allowed to do an environmental impact assessment to reduce the negative impacts on biodiversity. It's legal, but it's immoral. We need more and more examples of how what economic activities are doing actually favor biodiversity, favor community, and your project ticks all the boxes.
You know,
go ahead.
A little vignette of how the world is changing. One of the, we know it's not changing enough to deal with the scale of our challenge, but I'm in a conversation with Apple Computer that's made a commitment to fund regenerative, or what do they call it, restore fund for climate solutions. And they're talking and it's a fund managed by Goldman Sachs. And the primary way they're going to make an investment decision is not the traditional risk return. They're looking for carbon efficiency. So how efficient is this investment in sequestering carbon? They don't even want to buy the carbon. They want to know their investment is sequestering carbon. And I just find how the world has changed, that's the primary filter for selecting investment projects. And I just put this out. We're pursuing them. They got a lot of money. Anybody on this call looking for equity investment and sustainable land use, take a look at Apple's and Goldman Sachs Restore Fund.
Great. Yes, it's time to change, but we need to scale up. I'm not sure. We're going to get Rupert coming in from Glasgow, but I'm not sure if that was already him or not yet. Jim, can you advise?
Edward, it's Peter Carver speaking right now.
Yes, everyone. Rupert Reed, who's been one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion, but he's been a frequent contributor to our Humanity Rising program. He's in Glasgow. He's about ready to give a short report, which is being live streamed from Glasgow. We've hooked up the live streaming together. So Ed, I suggest we just continue with our program, and then when Rupert takes the podium, then we'll break into the program for this special news announcement, as they say on TV. But let's continue. Things have a way of getting delayed, as we all know.
Okay, well, there are a lot of very good comments on your project, Sean, in the chat. There are also a few questions, and one of them, of course, is what about the drug issues and how they are? I mean, I know myself, and we saw this, how avocado plantations are laundries for money laundries for drug issues, and it's hard to compete because they don't need return on investment.
Well, actually, yeah. Avocados are the most lucrative way to launder money, and you even get a tax benefit. So you think about the oil companies; they get a subsidy for drilling oil. There's a similar subsidy for avocados. So it's that's our biggest source of competition on land use. Avocados, much more profitable. It's like almonds in California. It's doesn't have to be a negative impact, but it is the way it's grown. And in terms of the issue of organized crime, yeah, certainly something I'm learning about. I'm working with a family business that for 93 years has been buying pine resin from forest communities in Michoacan. I've learned that in Mexico, there's like 1% of all companies in all of Mexico have lasted more than 90 years. So this is a pretty unusual group. That how did this 3 generations survive and navigate organized crime, which has been around for decades? So that's sort of the backdrop. I think I've learned a lot about how to manage public security and public risk, and we have GPSs on our vehicles and this and that. But basically, I'd say we avoid hot zones. We don't pay bribes, or no corruption, no bribes, and we work in partnership with local leaderships. And those local leaders, we do get phone calls, and they say today is not a good day to drive on the highway, or this week you really don't want to come to our community. So we get it's a network, an intelligence system, and organized crime. They like tree planting because the people in the communities like tree planting, and people are happy. And the bigger challenge is when we're tapping. We do have regions where people are tapping, and those tappers are facing extortion and are being forced to pay a small amount. Our approach, my bigger group, we're challenging organized crime in the pine resin industry. Our biggest problem is a U.S. company called Eastman out of Tennessee, and they're sourcing pine resin from Michoacan, from organized crime. And my group have gone on a friendly basis and on a legal basis to tell them to stop doing that, and they're not listening. So we're really trying to reduce the demand, for extortion in our industry by challenging the U.S. company that's one of the primary creating the demand for this, tainted product. We're about to enter into an area. We're having a big conversation about we're expanding, and there's some great areas to expand where organized crime is established. Where, it's delicate, but I'd say all in all, we've never had a problem. Had a couple vehicles stolen on the road in 10 years, but that's why we have insurance. So
Thank you, Sean. Maybe just before we end, I think one of the most admirable aspects of your project and your initiatives actually is the fact that you've been able to tap into the money world with, at the same time, doing good. Most of the good initiatives are actually philanthropy, donations, and actually what the market is looking for is business models, impact investment and returns. They don't have to be big returns, as you said. Maybe just the fact of fixing carbon is already an interesting issue. Can you say in a few sentences, what is the secret to get, and this is a weird question, I know, but what tips can you give to people who want to do regenerative projects and don't have access to funding? How do you prepare yourself to get funding?
There's the classic, okay? Make sure you got a good plan, you got a good leadership team, build some early wins, early wins in your whatever you're building, that you can declare some early wins. Want to build some momentum. These are sort of standard how to build an early stage business, even a business with purpose. I think the right team is key, momentum is key. And then, it's still hard. I can't say we're successful yet, right? It is a process. I'm working, I got organized crime, where it's no private property. I got, Mexican government doesn't exactly have a great reputation among international investors. So I got a lot of challenges, but yeah, we're getting them there. They see the team, they see the momentum, they see the backing we have in industry. I'm an unusual business where I have this guaranteed demand for my product. That's very unusual. I think that when they see others with skin in the game, right? So they say, I got local business people from I got the US and Mexican pine chemicals industry invested in what I'm doing. I think that shows that outside investors, there's skin in the game by local people that really know the business. So all those things help, but I will tell you, every single investor conversation I have starts with something like, can you provide us an absolute liquid guarantee? They all ask for the same thing. They want some really rich company or person to give 100% guarantee. If the loan or investment doesn't work out, they'll get paid. And so that's part of the work we have. We all need to take risks. We live in a world with great uncertainties. We manage risk and uncertainty in our business and investment decisions. And, and I say the other little nugget that I'm learning in making these deals, because we are a complicated investment deal, is it really, every time it works, it's because we have somebody inside the other side, the other company, that's going to be a champion. So we need to really be clear when you're moving these deals forward, who's going to be the champion inside the organization you're trying to get money from. And that's where my reflection is the money, the big money, the multi-million dollar investments that come in every single time. It's because there was a very skilled, passionate champion within that capital providing organization.
Thank you so much, Sean. This has been inspiring. This is exactly the type of message I wanted to bring out to the public that's listening to us, especially looking at the parallel world that's happening at the COP, totally alienated from reality and what we really need to do. And you're an example of exactly what we need to do. And we need to have hundreds of projects of these, not only with pine resin, all sorts of different projects that show that you can actually make money while you're regenerating the planet and making it livable and making conditions for better living for all life forms on the planet. Thank you, Sean, so much. Thank you.
Thank you. A pleasure. Thank you.
And I'll ask my good friend Alex to join us now. Alex is going to tell us about a beautiful story that is also working with local and indigenous communities in a business that makes money for all, and at the same time have community life coming back, livelihoods, you have biodiversity coming back. I'm not going to take time away from you, Alex. Just go ahead, please. Welcome.
Thank you, Edward. Thank you for the invitation, and great to always be listening to Paul here. And well, with Guayaquil Yerba Mate, what's interesting is that we've gone to nature to learn from nature and just go into a deep learning experience. And sort of like with this concept of a cluster, I like to refer it as a term that Alex Laszlo just coined it a few weeks ago, and which is learning ecosystems in territory. So why do I say this? It's because, yes, we're working with all the different actors on territory, governance and small farmers and NGOs and building alliances on a very, very local level. But we're always learning from nature. We're always learning in our case, from the yerba mate. And the yerba mate plant is just such an amazing opportunity for small farmers, for indigenous communities that have little small pockets of remnants of Atlantic forest. And it's really just an incredible alternative, source of income for them. They can't plant soybeans, right? So they have these small properties. So they're the great regenerators. And then, having the ability to grow the yerba mate in the shade, that's how it naturally occurs. It occurs inside the Atlantic rainforest, and it grows very well in the shade. Well, it creates these corridors, right, for mesofauna, birds, tapirs, jaguars, and everything. So it starts to increase these small pockets of last remnants of Atlantic forest and starts to create these corridors and these connections, right, with like the Embaracaju Reserve in Paraguay, with San Rafael, and with the private reserves, and it starts to create these biological corridors with the small farmers growing the shade-grown yerba mate. So it's really, I feel that the regeneration occurs in a very local level, and it's really working efficiently, and it's working economically, with its own finance and and its own economy in a very local level. What is the key here? I think that the key for Guayaquil, I just laugh because sometimes people says, how do you pronounce Guayaquil? And I say, well, imagine a door and a key, Guayaquil. So I believe that Guayaquil is that opportunity to open new doors of perception, to push the boundaries of regenerative design, right? And to just like all the time be pushing these boundaries. How do we do that? Well, obviously, integrating all the different voices and holding the space in time. So if we're there, like I just came back from Paraguay. I haven't been able to go there for the last 2 years because of the pandemic. And I go there, I go and visit Guida Foundation, which they have the San Rafael Reserve. Guida is an extension of BirdLife. And they like, so nice to receive you, Alex. And I was introducing them to our new CEO, who comes from Red Bull. He was the CEO of Red Bull. Now he's working for Guayaquil, and he's an amazing person. He's Austrian, married with a Brazilian. And he was just arriving to Paraguay in this very conflicting zone, also with illegal crops and, and deforestation and logging. But Guida has been working there for years. But in the last couple of years, the partnership together with Guayaquil has just like hit an acupuncture point, because Guayaquil now purchases the yerba mate from all these small growers that live in the buffer zone of the Reserva San Rafael, right?
Alex?
Yes.
I apologize, but Rupert Reed is now live from Glasgow. So could we hold that point?
Yeah.
And we'll circle back as soon as Rupert's done. But this is a live feed at a press conference in Glasgow. So Rick, can you bring Rupert on?
Deep adaptation. He's also the co-founder of transformativeadaptation.com. So Rupert, we'd like to hear from you.
So I want to make a bold claim, but I think it's true. This COP will go down in history as the COP that killed 1.5 degrees. It is not true that 1.5 degrees is being kept alive by this COP. It's not even on life support as far as I'm concerned. The analyses of the Climate Action Tracker and the UNEP Emissions Gap Report addendum are clearly showing that when you take into account what is realistically offered by this COP, then we are heading for closer to 3 degrees. And it is no longer possible to let them credibly get away with saying that that's a way of keeping 1.5 degrees alive. When I read the draft agreement the other day, I was actually shocked. I've got to admit it to you. I feel almost scandalized about myself to say that, because I've been warning for months about how ineffectual this COP is going to be. But even I wasn't expecting something as vapid as the actual document. There's basically nothing in it. Nothing by way of commitments. All it says is we want to try and do this, that, and the other in the future. It is simply an exercise in kicking the can down the road. That's it. And given that, we must conclude that 1.5 degrees is no longer credible. And this is a terrible thing to have to say, but I think it's nothing but the truth. So, because of the recalcitrance of a substantial number of countries, COP26 has failed us, and it has failed our children who are left begging for their lives. And in the light of that, I want to raise a couple of uncomfortable questions. First question is this. Yeah, sure, we can point our fingers at the fossil fuel industry, obviously, and at the countries failing to show leadership, and there are other villains as well. But what about our own role in this? Does it actually make sense to be part of a process which is so direly off the pace? Are those of us who have been strong critics of this COP, of the COP process, of the recalcitrance of those countries and so forth, are we nevertheless in some sense legitimating the process by way of being here, even as we sit here in this press conference? I'm not honestly sure what the answer to this question is, but it seems to me that we have reached the point where we need to ask a question like that. We have reached a point where we need to no longer assume that taking part in this can-kicking exercise actually makes sense. And my second uncomfortable question is this. Well, if there's anything right about my first uncomfortable question, well, should there be further elements to this can-kicking exercise? Should we be all assuming that, well, of course there'll be a COP27 at Cairo and then a COP28 and so forth. Is that also now potentially part of the problem rather than of the solution? Should there be more COPs? It will be said in response, but look, I mean, the COP process may be dire, but it's better than having no process at all. And it does at least supply some kind of legitimacy in international law to claims from protesters in courts and so forth. But what I'm saying is we have to make an honest assessment. Do the benefits at this point actually outweigh the costs? Would it be better to say, it's not 1 minute to midnight, it's not midnight, it's 5 past midnight. The COP system has failed. Arguably, it was designed to fail. It never had any sanctions built into it, as, for example, the Montreal Protocol did. There was never any way of enforcing anything that's been happening these last 25 years. Should it actually carry on? So that's my second uncomfortable question. And now my conclusion. If you think that anything that I've said is true, then we must take the first steps of fully claiming our agency and no longer outsourcing it to governments and to a process who are clearly not intending to use it to save us. And what's the implication of that? Well, right here in Glasgow, we need to find some strong way of asserting that. We need to find some strong way of asserting that we recognize, I'm going to use a bit of sort of copy language here, that we recognize that it's 5 minutes past midnight, that we recognize, that we acknowledge that our governments are not planning to save us, and that we intend to take back the power that they have abdicated using. And what that means in very small, micro terms, it seems to me, in the next couple of days as this COP comes towards a close, is that not just outside the blue zone, but inside the blue zone, we should consider protesting. We should consider walking out. We should consider joining those who are outside the exits. We should consider joining those who are going to be protesting in London on Saturday. We must mark and narrate this infamous moment in human history, the moment where 1.5 became consigned to history and where it became clear that no one's coming to save us.
Thank you for that sober assessment, Reid, and those, Rupert, and those questions that you ask are indeed questions I've been asking myself. And it's definitely very important to ponder upon. I too have been wondering if this is all one big charade that we're partaking in. And you mentioned mourning, and when I hear that word and I hear your idea that, you know, we've passed 1.5 and on the pathway to 3 degrees, how then do we deal with this, the idea of mourning and the youth that we've let down so much, the youth that is supposed to be filled with promise and hope for the future, when yet they're looking forward with a sense of mourning? How do we prepare them? How do we support them? What would our role be, do you think, Rupert? Yeah,
well, I think that's a great question. There's obviously much that I haven't said in my brief remarks, and the same for my excellent colleagues here. One unsaid implication is there needs to be a much bigger pivot to adaptation if what we're saying is right, because, you know, the shit's coming down the pike at us, so we're going to have to prepare for it. But another, as you say, is there's going to be a great deal of suffering of a psychological kind, as well as of a more obvious physical kind as a result of the non-decisions being made here. And that kind of pain, that eco-grief, that eco-anxiety, that requirement for mourning, we're going to have to find ways of supporting that and facilitating that. My own view is that that is actually now one of our best hopes also, that we could find some better way of going forward from the terrible state that we're in as a species right now, frankly. In other words, I think that these painful emotions, if you allow yourself to really experience them, to really face the grief, the anxiety, the anger, the horror, they give you an immense power. That power is what has fueled Extinction Rebellion. That power is what has fueled Greta. And I think we've only just started to really taste and feel that power. So if we're looking for hope in this desolate situation, I think the hope comes from precisely being willing to feel and go through that mourning process.
Thank you, Alex and Ed. I think, needed to hear that, Ed, coming from Glasgow, because I think that should frame our discussion that we're going to have tomorrow. And would love, Alex, to hear any kind of response you would like to make from that, I think, consensus statement of citizen activists there in Glasgow. But Ed, I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, I don't think I had told Alex about these interruptions from Glasgow Live, but it does shake us up. And definitely, I need to talk with Rupert, because we need to get the solutions into the discussion. We can reverse climate change by regenerating, and we have time to do it, and nature will help us do it. But it's not in the discussions. And the soil, the oceans, they were not discussed, and that's where the solutions are. We would then gain time to fight the oil industry and all the corrupt politicians and everything else. But we have the solutions. And we've discussed it in day 2 of Humanity Rising in this section. The ability to fix close to 54 gigatons of carbon every year. That's 50% more than the total emissions. So we'd be fixing 1.5 times the global emissions every single year. And that would bring us back to a normal planet, at least give us time to do all the other stuff. But I don't know why we can't get it into the conversations. We need to quit pointing fingers on and start talking about the solutions and get a network and scale them up. And we can do it. I think that's where we have to focus on. So we should have a Humanity Rising with Rupert and other people, and actually start telling people how we can solve it. And each of us can contribute to solving it in our backyards. So let's do that. And I'll go back to Alex. And sorry, Alex, for this interruption, but you can see how urgent your work is and how we need to scale it up to other fields beyond yerba mate, and how we really need to start working together in sharing these experiences that give hope then for investors and for people to actually know that we can be part of the regeneration if we move fast enough. Alex, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a moment to grieve, and I agree. You know, the Che Guayaquil community that we work with, they have their song is called Chinga, and it's a grief. They cry, deep cry, but they also sing, and they also dance as medicine. So I think that grief is important, but also singing and coming together and dancing to expand our spirit and bring us hope and bring us together when it seems impossible, an impossible future, right? And these are communities that have gone through genocides and, you know, set up in reserves, and, you know, they all practically have gone extinct, and now they're regenerating, and they're growing yerba mate in the forest, and and the grandparents are connecting with the grandchildren, and in their communities, they're producing food, and they're alive, and they hug each other, and they're happy and celebrating their identity, and they've gone through terrible genocide. I keep on learning from them, every day, and Guayaquil is just holding the space, and like I was saying, how important it is to be present, and it's about the relationships, right, that we build among each other and with nature, sustaining time that allow us to, really, if a water tank is donated by the World Bank and then, gets stuck or it gets with microbes, and then you have to, chlorine the water, and you're there, you're present, you're looking at resolving, problems because you're present. Or if two caciques are fighting because somebody else is coming and, creating that fight, you're there, you're present to also, sustain that relationship. So that's what I think Guayaquil in all these 25 years, being present with the communities has contributed to. And then there is, everyone else also contributing in the communities as well, through different alliances. And, if it's the yerba mate industry donated by the World Bank or Interdevelopment Bank, or, building of roads, and everyone is helping, but being there and being present with each other, I think it's key, and, and it's encouraging, and it just creates like hope in times that everything seems like pretty dark, right? But I'd rather be an optimist and be in the battlefields and be working with the small growers and in the land, and and of course that then gets translated into a can that's sold in the US. And so young people that's studying and have access to better education can also see how important it is to consume products that are regenerating, and that there is an impact assessment done along the whole process, and be aware that, how much energy goes into aluminum, how much energy goes into the water being used for creating that can, the distribution, who is distributing, who's driving those trucks, just the whole system. We have so much more to learn, and there's so many green jobs available. We are hiring every day. So thank you.
Alex, can you one of the interesting parts of your story for me was listening how you start a company like that, and how difficult it is. You talk like 25 years, it's done, but I can assure you the same when I founded the university 27 years ago. It's not an easy thing to do. So if we want more people to do businesses like yours and regenerate the planet, what would you actually advise on how to start something like that?
Yeah, I would just encourage everyone to dream and ask themselves, what is their dream, and that, I've learned from the indigenous communities, instead of saying good morning every day, they say, what was your dream, and learn from the dreams and live your dream, and share your challenges and opportunities with others, and just make your dreams real, because they can become real. Even though everything seems impossible and nobody's going to drink yerba mate in the US, and things like that. It's just the flavor's not there. It's coffee or, energy drinks. And but you got to push those boundaries. I encourage everyone to just really, start their business with their heart and passion, and knowing that they're contributing for the better good of, for all of us and for the earth. And there's this like word that is pronoia. I don't know if you heard that. It's the opposite to paranoia. Pronoia, which is when the universe conspires in favor of you because you're doing something for the good of the universe, right? And it just seems like it can be done. And sometimes you believe that the universe is conspiring in favor. It's just, yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Thank you so much, Alex. I'm going to hop on to share my screen and give you all an idea of what's happening in Costa Rica with Regenerate Costa Rica. It's a few minutes, and then we can go to have a few questions and answers before we finish the session today. So very quick, thank you, Alex. And for very few moments, I'll just share my screen. Which is it? Sorry, guys, I have too much open. Just a moment. Somehow my computer got stuck. Okay. Here we are. So, Regenerate Costa Rica. It's based on the fact that we can build our future. I'm not willing to learn how to adapt to a collapsing planet. And right now we have actually already Regenerate Colombia, Regenerate Mexico. We launched Regenerate Chile a couple of weeks ago. Denmark wants to regenerate. And we're getting a network around the world together with the Regenerative Communities Network and other initiatives to actually co-create solutions. And we can co-create solutions based on good experiences like the ones we saw today. We saw 3 beautiful stories on how to actually show that we can build a better system that will make the old one obsolete. And thank you, Buck Fuller, for those words. So in our case, we consider the land, ecosystems, biodiversity, functional landscapes as the base. Mother Earth is the basis for anything we want to do in regeneration. So we need to learn from Mother Earth. We need to do biomimicry, and I'm talking about applied biomimicry in communities, in the way nature is actually working. And we can learn a lot from the way nature is working, and mainly the holistic approach, because our reductionist scientific system is the reason, I think, why the COPs collapse, why we're not getting solutions for complex problems, because you cannot solve them from the disciplines. And then on the other side of the toroid, we have the spiritual dimension, which is left out of all of these negotiations. It's left out of the MBAs. It's left out of government strategies. And that mindfulness, that empathy, the global empathy, not only between humans, but between humans and other life forms, and recognize that the living planet is nature and we are part of nature. We're not controlling nature as we were told we should do over the last 200 or 300 years. So this is the basis of our work. And I'll just show you very quickly a few examples that are related to biodiversity conservation. So we are helping communities produce their own food in a regenerative way, mainly because COVID actually left a lot of people, because Costa Rica is so dependent on tourism, and tourism was closed down overnight. People didn't have money, and they don't have bank accounts, they don't have savings, and there was no more agriculture here because the land value was too high. So people just abandoned agriculture many years ago, probably 3-4 decades ago, and were cleaning gardens, cleaning toilets, making beds for the hotel industry. So how do you start regenerating a whole bioregion and getting resilience to the community? This photo is interesting because we had 2 hurricanes in November that flooded everything, washed the soils away. And we had already started a couple months before with family farms. This is a family farm for people to be able to eat. And we did it using indigenous knowledge. We did it using what Cuba developed when the Russians left and they had the blockade with no chemicals and no food. And these plants kept on growing even throughout the hurricanes, even throughout the flooding. And this gives resilience to the community. We were able to convert these degraded soils into abundance. Some of the communities are producing 8 to 10 tons of food in every hectare and 30, 40 different products at the same time. So it's diversity, it's no monoculture. We've managed to turn these degraded soils into a paradise for insects that are coming back. 95% of them are the insects that are helping us control the pests. And this is amazing, the speed in my country in the tropics, the speed nature can come and help us replenish the earth with life. All we need to do is work with her and give her a chance to do it. We don't really have to do more than imitate how nature does. And so biomimicry for us is a fundamental component. Everything is just abundant. Everything is really changing the way we relate and these communities relate to their environment. And they're so thankful, and now they're eating well. They even have surplus to sell to the markets and pay their bills. And it's a learning process. We're working with technical schools. We're working with primary schools. The communities are coming together. And it's in spite of government. It's in spite of the big corporations. It's in spite of the mainstream that is dominating our political fields in our countries today. And from this bottom-up approach, we can actually start really bringing other knowledge systems in, like the indigenous knowledge and the food forests that were grown in these lands before we got colonized and our agriculture got destroyed and our culture got destroyed. And we're still getting colonized by the corporate sector, by the universities that are in perverse alliances with the petrochemical industry, still training people to go spray fields with pesticides and to apply nitrogen and phosphorus and other things, and saying that that's the only way to produce food. So what we're doing is showing the opposite. We can produce lots of amounts of food, abundant food, without using a drop of chemicals and actually bringing life back. And with the insects come the birds and the rest, and recovering our agrobiodiversity. Latin America is the birthplace for many of the products we use today, but the global system has simplified our food sources. And we need to go back to recover all this genetic material that could have genes for resilience to warming planet, to droughts, to floods. And this is another part of our initiative, recovering what our grandmothers used to use, and a huge diversity of plants that everybody grew in their backyard and had food. This is a country that you can eat. So there should be no hunger here at all. With cattle, holistic cattle grazing and Saver Institute, we're regenerating huge amounts of land and capturing enormous amounts of carbon. I wish the soil carbon would have had a bigger traction. I know the champions of the COP brought it to the table, but it wasn't really included. Oceans were not really included in the discussions, and we can regenerate our landscapes. And on top of working with cattle, with regenerative agriculture, with regenerative tourism, with the municipal level, the governments, we are now looking at the larger landscape. We can identify where connectivity can be reestablished. So by producing more in less land, we can give back 20, 30, 40, or 50% of the land back to nature. And though that land will help harvest the water and keep our aquifers for the dry season, so we have water throughout the year. And this is now done with all this technology we have. We have so much technology available that will help us speed these things up. So large scale monitoring is actually very interesting right now, how life is coming back and how we can establish these microbiological corridors throughout our agricultural fields. The photo in the back, that's actually our dean of the Faculty of Environment and Development, catching butterflies, to be able to understand how we're impacting also the gallery forests and how we can establish connectivity, how we can fix carbon, how we can actually enhance community livelihoods. And we have another project for the urban area. So no matter what landscape it is, if it's urban, if it's rural, if it's a protected area, if it's agricultural, every single landscape should produce benefits for nature, benefits for the communities, and economic benefits. So we can get it, we're actually starting working with this city and identifying where possible connectivity is still there to connect to the forests and other green areas that are outside the city, and have the city not interrupt that biological, ecological landscape. So a city should provide ecosystem services also. And we can actually look at the houses and start substituting exotic species, exotic plants with native plants by bringing all the pollinators back, and then adding corridors with trees that on the streets, bringing forest cover back and lowering the temperature of these cities, which are now very hot during the dry season, and because of all the cement that has been put in there. So we can actually transform these cities into areas for biodiversity. And the person who is leading this, Edgar Mora, he was the mayor of a city that's now famous around the world. It's called the Sweet City. He declared bees, plants, and trees and earthworms citizens of the city. And this has allowed them to gain a space in the decision-making process. So by bringing nature back to the cities, we're bringing life back. And I've heard, and Rupert actually said, yeah, adaptation, we need to learn how to adapt to the future. I don't think so. I think that's wrong. We can build the future we want. We still have time, and nature is still willing to work with us on that. So that was my very brief intervention of what Regeneration Costa Rica is doing. We're just proving that we don't need to fight the system. We just need to create a new system that works for all of us, and will quickly make the old system obsolete. That's what we're doing. And I think that's what we need to spread around and just scale it up. And so anybody who's listening, we just saw 4 examples of what can be done without big support, without, or in spite of government, in spite of other people, the naysayers, the people who are saying, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do it. Well, yes, we can, and we're doing it. So I'll open the floor to discussions, to questions. Our speakers that are still back on, Sean, you're still here. Alex, if you're here, you can turn on your videos. Jim, if you want to turn on your video, and we can have a short discussion, or we can answer questions. We still have a few minutes, right, Jim? Somebody's asking about the cultural manual, the Indigenous Agriculture Manual. Yes, that's an older version. We're launching a new version, should be ready in a couple of months. But if you look at Costa Rica Regenerativa, I'll write that in the chat. There will be the new manuals right there. I don't know. Jim, you want to say anything, or Sean or Alex, any afterthoughts?
Yeah, I think, Ed, you know, I think that what was coming to me as I was juxtaposing what you and Sean and Alex were saying with regards to what Rupert Reed was saying from Glasgow is that, you know, in some ways, it feels to me we have to hold both truths in our minds now. That we're heading now to at least 2.5, 3 degrees because our governments are refusing to do anything. And we can regenerate. And I think what Rupert was really opening up for all of us to contemplate is that, for the last 26 years, we've been, I think, rightfully assuming that our governments in the end were going to do something. And what we've discovered this week is that in the end, they are not. So what that means to me is that what you were saying, and Alex and Sean, even Chip earlier in the program, is that we've come to the Buckminster Fuller moment where we have to do it ourselves. And what we have to do ourselves is basically around regeneration in a very, very fundamental level. And as you're pointing out, if we do that, if we assume the governments are out of the picture and the corporate financial system is out of the picture, that really narrows the scope of our activity. And I think that's something that we're going to certainly talk about tomorrow. But I just wanted to note what Jung would call the antinomial nature of reality now, that we have some very stark truth and we have some very powerful optimistic truth. But we, the people, now have to take control of the positive aspects, knowing that our governments, at least for the moment, are refusing to take the kind of action we need. So anyway, I'd love to hear Alex or Sean, your comment on this and what Ed just said.
Sean.
Well, I can give it a try. And I just want to also acknowledge Alex and Guayaquil. It's really, we got a really modest flavor of the amazing things that Guayaquil does, both on the sourcing side and in Latin America. And I think their regenerative impact on the selling side, in the countries that are buying their product. I guess when I think about doers, what we got put together here, the people we're doing stuff. And hearing that Glasgow comment, from the Glasgow, things are bad, right? We know it's really bad. So I think about where do I find hope and motivation when things are so bad? And the hardest conversation for me is the one with my extremely intelligent adolescent children who probably know more about climate change than I do. And I'm excited. They're excited about the future. And despite the fact that we know things are going to get worse, the hyperbole we've lost on the 1.5. Can we get back? So I guess my answer, it's a people's movement. We have a global crisis of values. We've seen this happen in our planetary history before. The best analogy for me is the Civil War, civil rights movement in the United States, where we had a crisis of values and it took a people's movement to really shift the societal norms and values and expectation and role of government. Our governments are failing us. They are becoming increasingly irrelevant. We have unbridled power of private capital and private corporations. And we have this new generation, the millennials, who are recognizing profit maximization as a goal is inadequate, right? We need more. We need purpose and profit. So I find my hope. We got to build a movement. We are a movement. It's got to get built faster. I personally gave up on the policymakers, and I think it's going to be creating the demand on the ground. It's the consumers, the activists, the business people. We're innovating those solutions. We got to demand change from our governments. They're clearly broken and not able to do it on their own. So I guess that's where I guess I find my strength and inspiration is I'm going to leave the world a better place than I found it. And it keeps me going.
Thank you. Thank you. Jim, you should say something about the Global Regeneration Corps. We need people to hop into the hive, and we need to mainstream this, and we need to put everybody together that's doing whatever everybody's doing in regeneration into one movement and get a voice out. And for the next COP, have a COP on regeneration.
Yes, indeed. Well, one of the things that we've been talking about on almost every day, everyone, is the Global Regeneration Corps, of which Ed and others have been the inspiration. as we were taking in over the summer the IPCC report, as we were taking in the Secretary General's statement that we are now in code red, which, as Rupert just said, means that we're not 1 or 2 minutes to midnight. We're not even at midnight. We're past midnight now. And I think that reality is sinking in. And so in the face of this, Ed is absolutely right. Sean, you're absolutely right. We've got to now leave the policymakers and our politicians behind and seize the moment. And as Ed has said numerous times, regeneration is the only option in the face of extinction. We can't be sustainable with a broken ecology. We have to get in there and regenerate proactively, as you all have demonstrated can be done profitably in different parts of the world, even in a country like Mexico, which is challenged by criminal syndicates in ways that few countries actually are. Sean, I just want to acknowledge your courage, man, and your perseverance in the face of intractable complications. And if you can do it there, anybody can do it anywhere. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is to put out a global call for action, the Global Regeneration Corps, not as an organization among other organizations, but as an opportunity for organizations and individuals from around the world to come together and create pods of what actually Ed coined the term, regeneration first responders, and then link them together globally for a regenerative network, an Indra's net of regeneration around the world as a response to Code Red. So people can sign up either as an organization or an individual. Just go to globalregenerationcorps.com, and we have people on standby to work with you to get involved in a pod or start a pod, or as an organization to identify where you would like to see a pod work, and to be able to offer mentorship and wise counsel to pods as they get started to ensure success. That's one of the issues that we're working on with Chip Conley, who's made his modern Elder Academy available, also Encore, for the kind of mentorship that young people really need to have. So that's the Global Regeneration Corps. But we're just about at time. So Alex, Sean, and then Ed, I just love a minute of just a closing statement of hope and inspiration as we finalize this 11th day of the Conference of Parties in Glasgow. Alex?
I'm not sure Alex is still with us. He
had to go.
He had several meetings in parallel, so he escaped.
So Sean, you give us a final minute, then Ed,
sure.
and then we'll
Every
close it
crisis is an opportunity, right? There are all these theories around, when we have a paradigm shifts, we need a crisis. We're in that crisis, and the opportunity, we're in this rapid technological information, digital revolution. We're redefining gender, we're redefining work. So I think in this moment, we're in the middle of it, of a radical revolution. And I think there's an opportunity, a huge opportunity, to really bring about the changes that we're talking about here. So I've learned time and again, crisis is an opportunity. Market goes down, it's a good time to invest. And we're in one of those moments.
Well put.
I agree fully, Sean. You're totally correct. This is the best moment for us to live and make the difference. And the doors are open. And it's new ideas and examples of how to do it, which will motivate other people to come and help us and do their own.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Sean. Thank you all. I think that's the bottom line. The darkest hour is just before the dawn. And the greater the crisis, the greater the opportunity. And it's just now apparent, and I think abundantly clear, that we, the people of the world, as you've seen Sean and Alex and Ed demonstrate today, are what we've been waiting for. COP26 is in some ways the clarion call that no one else is going to save us. We have to save ourselves through the pathway of regeneration. And we're doing that in Humanity Rising. We're doing that through the Global Regeneration Corps. Sean, my God, is doing that in the depths of Mexico and in Costa Rica, setting up a network of regenerative countries. So hope burns brighter the greater the darkness. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again tomorrow for our 12th and final day. And we'll be talking about eco-grief. We'll be talking about hope and optimism. We'll be talking about how we now speak with our young people in the aftermath of COP26. Bye for now. See you all again tomorrow.